Mr. Freeman, they could have capitalized on the strength that exists in Ethiopia today. Look at the situation in the onset of this reform 3 years ago.
Yes.
More than 2 million internally displaced people, mostly or almost, displaced from the Somali region.
Yes.
This government has, resettled them. Mm-hmm. Now that is overcome. Mm-hmm. Now that's a successful resettlement. Mm-hmm. Now in Tigray, as you said, more than 1 million internally displaced people might be there. Mm-hmm. Again, much of the support comes from the Ethiopian government. Mm-hmm. The international community, while condemning undermining the government effort, why don't they support? I mean, there is nothing we get out of the weakened Ethiopia, because this is a country of more than 100 million people.
Yes.
Again, this is not just an ordinary country.
Yes.
It's an extraordinary country with a long history of existence in this part of Africa.
Right.
And that it is a country that keeps all other countries together. And they know it, because in much of their statements they understand Ethiopia is a key partner, it's a regional power. They understand that. So if Ethiopia fails, because in most of their statements they say Ethiopia is going to collapse, is going to fail, this is going to be another Syria, and that time Syria is going to be even a child. Mm-hmm. Why is all that rumor going on around? Because Ethiopia is sovereign, can defend itself. Its history tells us that this is a country that has resilience despite odds in much of its history. Yes. Why, a responsible government, politicians leading that big country with a good name for that matter, advancing this, human rights and all that, want to see a weak Ethiopia that may even fail.
Consider the fact, as I said, that the president, and I'm not saying good or bad about President Biden, but you have to consider the fact that most of your high elected officials know very little about Ethiopia. They know very little about Africa. Mm. They usually don't even put Africa on the agenda until the second year of the administration. Therefore, it is somebody else who has a different agenda, which is not a U.S. agenda, because I'm an American and that's not my agenda. The United States was created in a noble way with a foreign policy of development. We go back even to Franklin Roosevelt in the 30s and 40s. He made profound statements for the development of Africa. So you have a faction of people, and they say, no, this is what we want. And they would not mind a few million or tens of millions of Africans dying. That would not bother them. Their hearts are not broken about what's going on in the Sahel. If they were, we'd be doing something about it. So then Obama can cry what we call in the U.S. crocodile tears, but we haven't done anything to help the Sahel in 10 years. And there's people who would say, fine, let Ethiopia dismember. Let tens of millions of Africans suffer. Let tens of millions of Africans die. That doesn't cost us anything, and we then can control and manipulate the situation afterwards. Now, the problem with that thinking is that really it doesn't work out that way. Look at the violent extremism in the Sahel. You have more UN soldiers killed in peacekeeping in Mali than have ever been killed in any operation in the history of the world. And it's not going to stop because Mali is under massive attack. If that happens in Ethiopia, it's going to be far worse because you have over 100 million Ethiopians. And if you start having Oroma, Amhara, and various groups attacking each other...
Again, it's happening in this region.
Yes, it'll be a complete disaster. Now, not everyone wants to do that, but there are some people that say that's the way we'll let that happen. There are other people who are very arrogant, and they say, well, we are the United States of America. We know what's best. So we're going to tell Prime Minister Abiy, you do this, like Blinken, Secretary of State. I find his policies, not only on Ethiopia, he's been arrogant in his discussions with the Chinese. He's been arrogant in the policy. Believe it or not, as bad as your situation might appear to be, the bigger danger in the world is a conflict between the United States and Russia. We are pushing Putin to the brink for no good reason. We're pushing China. We're intervening now in Taiwan again. Why are we doing this? Because the geopoliticians say, we, the West, Anglo-American, we are number one. And if we see someone coming up, rather than saying, let's work with them to expand development across the globe to our 8 billion people, they say, no, we have to put that person down. So as bad as the situation is here, it's actually worse on the international strategic arena, because you're talking about potential war between superpowers. But it's the same mentality. It's the same lack of understanding of how to develop a nation. And the fact that the self-interest of the United States lies in the self-interest of other nations. We are all sort of microcosms united in one large macrocosm of development. We have an interest in working with China. We have an interest in working with Russia. We have an interest in developing Ethiopia.
It was interesting, that you raised. There is this misunderstanding of the American politicians, the situation in Africa, the context in Africa, which ultimately led to the, America being taken over by China and Russia and other countries. And now America wants to get back to its position in Africa. So there is this situation. Many Africans want jobs, better livelihoods.
Of course.
And of course, Africans need freedom. Some of these demands of African citizens align with US policies.
Yes.
Values.
Yes.
They could have catered to that value,
yes,
so that Africans could have better livelihoods and better future. But the situation does not look like that. Now, Jeffrey Feltman is appointed, yes, by, as a special envoy for the Horn of Africa, in a statement released by the Secretary of State. And the statement reads, a special envoy, Feltman is uniquely suited to bring decades of experience in Africa and the Middle East. So this guy worked in Africa and the Middle East in the past. Fine. In multilateral diplomacy and in negotiation and mediation to develop and execute an integrated US strategy to address these complex regional issues. Of particular concern are the volatile situation in Ethiopia. So they understand that it's a volatile situation and it's of particular concern, including the conflict in Tigray, escalating tensions between Ethiopia and Sudan, the dispute around the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. These three things: Tigray, Ethio-Sudan relationship, and the Great Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. At a moment of profound change of this strategic region, they also understand there is change going on in this region. A high-level US engagement is vital to mitigate the risks posed by escalating conflict while providing support to once-in-a-generation opportunity for reform. I think this is a reform taking place in Ethiopia, and in one side they call it the once-in-a-generation opportunity, and we have to support it. At the same time, those three critical issues that I've raised: the situation in Tigray, the border conflict between Ethiopia and Sudan, and the Great Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. What is your take on this statement, Mr. Freeman?
First of all, we've discussed this situation in Tigray, and there is a history to that, which goes back to the your 1995 Constitution that established regional ethnic identities, regional ethnic control of government. That was a mistake. I understand why it was done, but it still was a mistake. And you have people who locate their identity in these regions and their ethnicity. When your identity is as a human being first, not an ethnic group, but a human being. And all human beings are more alike than any other creature you could think of, because we have a special power of creative reason in every person. So the ethnic question in Ethiopia is serious. It's been codified in your constitution. I would suggest a long, reasonable, non-emotional dialogue on this question of identity versus nation citizenship. And you're not the only country that's suffering. They're having the same discussions in Nigeria on identity. The question of the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam is very clear to me, because you're bringing power. Africans are dying, not will die. Africans die every day because we don't have electrical power. Some of us are just inconvenienced, but people do die because without electricity you can't have jobs, you can't have industry, you can't have an economy. So to deny Ethiopia the right to put 6.2 gigawatts of power into the grid is criminal. And Ethiopia will not only become the second largest producer of electricity in sub-Saharan Africa, behind South Africa, but it'll actually become the largest exporter because it's going to export to Kenya, to South Sudan, and other areas. This should be supported. There's a problem with the Egyptians. It goes back actually to, I think, 1902 and 1903 when Queen Victoria gave rights to the Egyptians then, and they thought they had it. They've had 2 conferences since then. Neither one of them was the Ethiopians at 1929 and 1959. And the Ethiopians should be concerned about making sure water is available, but this is a question of technical expertise. How heavy are the rains? How big is the fill rate? How long will it take? And this can be worked out. This is not a reason of confrontation. The Egyptians are behaving very foolishly on this question, and they do not have the support of sub-Saharan Africa. They make a lot of noise. They make military threats. I'd be hard to believe that they would actually go to war with it. South Sudan is really shouldn't even be an issue. Sudan and Ethiopia have all common interests. In fact, the waters that flow from Ethiopia into Sudan, which is fine. The two have a common interest. They have a very interesting history, the Ethiopian history, the Nubian history. Sudan is being blackmailed right now. They're being put under tremendous pressure because, in fact, the GERD will help Sudan because it will regulate the flow of water, which varies greatly. They can have floods, which are horrible, and they can have dry spells. If you have a body of water, which is about 74 billion cubic feet will be behind the dam, then you can release water and relieve those problems. And this conflict on the border is a bogus issue. The Sudanese and the Ethiopians have no fundamental disagreement. Their interest is common between the two countries. The Egyptians are playing a very nasty game, and the American side and the Israelis, because what they did is they manipulated Sudan to get removed from the list of international terrorist supporters and recognize Israel. Sudan obviously had to do certain things in return. But the Sudan issue is the most transparently absurd because Sudan only gains from the dam, and it gains nothing by these border clashes, which are ridiculous. So if you look at all these issues together, they can be solved. You can have countries sit down together among themselves, bring in the AU, but what Trump did was very dangerous, suggesting that Egypt could bomb Ethiopia. You don't talk like that in this area of the world where things are very volatile. He was very silly on that. Biden came in and released the funds that Trump had held based on his position in supporting Egypt on the dam. So that was a good thing. Now, what the Americans actually have to say on the dam is unclear to me at this point. And how much they understand the historical issue is unclear. There's a lot of support among some African Americans in the United States that Ethiopia has a right, sovereign right, to build a dam, and I support that view. Again, you have to, I know this is very hard for people to understand, but when elected officials speak in the United States, it doesn't mean they're speaking for the true interests of the United States. There is a fundamental interest of our country. Our country is a great country, even though it behaves very badly sometimes. But our principles are profound. And I love the history of my country. But when leaders speak, they're not always speaking in the interest of the country. They're not speaking in my interest. They're speaking some other interest, some other political, financial ideology that they believe in. So when they make these statements, are they in the interest of the United States? Are they in the interest of the American people? No. Was overthrowing Gaddafi in the interest of the American people? No. But they will do it anyway because they have an arrogance of power and they believe this is the way it should be. Now, the Prime Minister is very strong. I read one of his statements saying that we will not give in to international pressure. And they will apply international pressure. They use every international organization they can to demonstrate that they have the muscle and they can override and overrun the sovereignty of Ethiopia. And my point of view is I've always supported sovereignty. Even if it's mistaken policies, work them out, correct them, give an alternative. What I've been trying to do for the last 30 years is give alternatives to policy, not tell people you're rotten, we're going to get rid of you and have a regime change, which is what they try to do all over the place. I would be concerned in Ethiopia today, if I were in the government, that there is a regime change policy potentially out there. Mm-hmm. And that the best way for the Prime Minister to respond, from my point of view, is to fight for the unity of the country. What is good for all Ethiopians? Mm-hmm. What is not the regional identities, Ethiopians? How do we strengthen the Ethiopian identity, the Ethiopian nation state? And how do we as a government, since we've been put in power, our obligation is to improve the living standards. How are we improving the living standards of the Ethiopians, who many are poor? Mm. And that's what we've got to concentrate on.
But it is also, I think, very important to stress the fact that Ethiopia as a country has been in this very good relationship with America.
Yes, long history.
For long years. And Ethiopian people in general value that long friendship. But we also sometimes get concerned with this too much interference. Yes. As you say, we are a sovereign country and we value our sovereignty. You know many things about Africa and Ethiopia, that Ethiopians take pride with their sovereignty more than anything. Yes. And when you see this continuous and sometimes unnecessary interference, like for example, President Trump tried to push Egypt's position on Ethiopia. He pushed to other institutions like UN, things like that. Then he makes this very, very rudimentary statement that Egypt will blow up the dam.
Provocatory.
And fortunately, he left the office, and the new administration is also making this very uninformed statements. And again, the same question that I raised to you before. Is it American to make those uninformed statements, like making this very bold statement without having adequate evidence to support them? For example, like genocide. Isn't that worrying?
Ethnic cleansing.
Look, there was no...
For American value itself. Huh?
There was no evidence. There was no, and there is no evidence of genocide. If there was genocide, we would know about it.
By the way, even when they have evidence, look back to Rwanda and how Rwanda was failed.
Yes.
When the United Nations mission in Rwanda was giving information to the Clinton administration.
Yes.
They were not responsive, and that horror happened.
That's correct.
Rwanda was failed.
I think one thing you have to realize, I know this is a difficulty and takes hours and hours of the explanation, but the thinking in the United States has deteriorated over the last, I would say since the death of Kennedy, 1963, so that's close to 60 years. The thinking power of just reason on policy issues has gotten worse. The United States culture is we have become dumber. Right? I'm serious, we've become dumbed down. We're dumbed down by TV, we're dumbed down by sports, we're dumbed down by Hollywood. People don't think. So you say to yourself, how can we make these statements? Well, the politicians we elect come from the American people. If you have a culture that is shrinking in its outlook, in its vision, in its optimism, then that culture will produce inadequate political leaders. From my standpoint, what I know, and I don't know everybody, I look at the Democratic Party, I'm a Democrat, but I don't support everything my party does. If I look at all the political leaders I see in the United States, I don't see any real leadership. Now, there's a dearth of leadership all over the world. And Africa has a dearth of leadership. Europe has a serious problem in leadership. And we have a problem. There's no one in the Republican and Democrat Party right now that I could point to and say, this person's really got some serious thinking going on.
It appears that we are in the age of leadership crisis globally.
Yes, that's a good way to put it. We are in a global age.
But also in this statement that came out from the Secretary of State on the appointment of Flatman, they didn't say anything about the sixth national election. Ethiopia the Ethiopian parliament approved to hold election,
Yes.
and Ethiopia
Yes.
is investing a lot of money and taking, a lot of pressures
Yes.
under COVID to hold election, and we don't see them putting any statement regarding election.
And that is disconcerting. There should be a statement in support of the election. There should, in many elections in Africa, the United States has given money. I don't know if they've given money, but in many cases, the United States gives money for the printing of ballots, for security at the polls, etc. Millions of dollars we've given to, I think the last election in the Congo, we gave millions of dollars, the DRC. I am troubled by that as well. I was trying to find out more about that. Why haven't we said something in support of this election, which is 5 weeks away, less than 5 weeks away? And that may be telling, by the lack of saying something, they may be telling us something. Now, there are people all over the world who are saying that this election should not happen. And the election has to happen. There may be problems with the election, but it's going to have to happen. So therefore, maybe there are certain people who are going to use the election to do what? To say, this leader does not have legitimacy. See, this is what they tried to do this in, I was at the Cote d'Ivoire, I was an observer in the Cote d'Ivoire election, October 31st for President Ouattara. And the two parties that opposed him, at the last 2 weeks, they pulled out and they told the people don't vote because they were going to lose. Then after the election took place, and of course he got the largest vote, they then said, but this government is illegitimate because look, not everybody voted. But they told the people not to vote in opposition. So they will try to come back after the election and say, this is not a legitimate election, therefore Prime Minister Abiy is not a legitimate prime minister. They will call for possibly a transition government. They will possibly call for a coalition government. They might call for new elections. I'm not saying anything will happen. If I was in the government, I'd be looking at these all as possibilities that will be used to undermine the nation of Ethiopia. I'm an old hand at this. I've watched this now for 50 years. I've been involved in politics. You can see where, you can smell certain operations. And that's what they will try to do, because maybe Prosperity Party gets 30% of the vote, a plurality. So it doesn't get a majority, it gets a plurality. Well, a plurality can still be the elected official election. You can win with a plurality. But then they will say, but look, it's only so much percentage here, and he didn't get percentage there, and he didn't get percentage there. And is this really legitimate? Then you'll have NGOs on the streets demonstrating, putting out leaflets, saying illegitimate government, dictator, etc. This is what they do. You have organizations that are preparing now leaflets to be distributed on the, well, my day it was leaflets, now it's the internet. We'll put it on the internet, stories immediately after the election to undermine the election. That's a possibility.
I think
it's not a prediction.
They have tried that, and I think they got successful in regard to Somalia, where
Somalia.
the same thing happened.
Yes.
And now Farmajo seems to retreat back.
Yes.
Yeah.
But this is typical. They did this against President Mugabe in Zimbabwe. They did this against the former president in South Africa. They will pick up something that has maybe some legitimacy, there's some problem there, and they will make a movement out of it, and then that movement will become the basis of replacing your government, or usually replacing the leader. We'll see what happens. I'm not predicting, but this would not be beyond the realm of possibility.